Mr. Seth Hart to present his topic on humanity's end.
So just real quick, this is a much shortened version of a talk that I'll be giving later in November. So if things move a bit quick, I'm apologizing ahead of time. In Charles Taylor's exhaustive treatment of secularity and modernity, he observes that while contemporary humanism is marked by its repudiation of religious forms of transcendence, it has simultaneously elevated its own notions of the concept. Gerald McKinney comments on this assessment, stating, "Love that extends beyond erotic attachment to embrace a universal concern, the disciplining of tendencies to aggression and violence and forms of overcoming promoted by thinkers such as Nietzsche and Foucault are all characteristic features of modern ethical life. It is difficult to imagine how a life devoid of these or some other form of transcendence could be genuinely fulfilling." In the last half century, a small but disproportionately influential movement known as transhumanism has arisen to offer renewed grounds for universal concern and an ethical imperative in the wake of widespread disillusionment with the Christian narrative. A predominantly atheistic movement, transhumanism subsumes Christian eschatological categories while populating them with technological surrogates. Cleansed of medieval delusions of parousia and divine liberation, humanity might refresh its transcendental hopes upon the solid rock of scientific progress. In a cosmos deprived of divinity, human destiny is to fill that vacancy. However, our deification advances only in conjunction with our continuous technological development. Two of the most prominent advocates of this position in recent years have been Ray Kurzweil and Yuval Noah Harari. Compare this quotation to the one from McKinney. Although some regard what is referred to as spiritual as the true meaning of transcendence, transcendence refers to all levels of reality, the creation of the natural world, including ourselves, as well as our own creations in the form of art, culture, technology, and emotional and spiritual expression. As a consummation of the evolution in our midst, the singularity, which is his term, this is Kurzweil's term for the final goal, will deepen all of these manifestations of transcendence. I've chosen to focus on Harari and Kurzweil as representatives of what I see as two prominent camps within transhumanism. The first are what I call high optimism and is represented by Kurzweil and Moravec. They tend to focus on the unmitigated good future technologies will achieve, believing that our deification through technology is, quote, inevitable. The second group I've called low optimism. Harari and Nick Bostrom are representative of this camp. While still pressing for the need or inevitability of technological progress, they are more cautious or wary of potential dangers along the way. Bostrom, for example, declines to put the odds of human extinction via technology at anything lower than 25%. Regardless, Bostrom is one of the biggest advocates for transhumanism, and Harari's best-selling book, Homo Deus, has perhaps done more to popularize secular transhumanism than anything else to date. For that reason alone, I will focus on his thought, namely Harari's. Lastly, there are pessimistic transhumanists. Martin Rees might represent someone holding to this, but we'll return to his position at the end. To begin, we need to briefly outline the philosophical and religious background of optimistic transhumanism. For starters, it is well acknowledged by scholars that the movement has inherited its ideological structure from Christianity, namely the myth of progress born out of Christian millenarianism. One of the prominent Christian doctrines of the 18th and 19th century was the view that the church was about to usher in the 1,000-year reign of Christ. This fueled optimistic missionary work, scientific progress, and even colonialism. According to Paul Ricoeur, this faith has slowly made its way into our culture, becoming a, quote, rationalized corruption of Christian eschatology. Transhumanists do not merely attempt to describe what will happen, though. They also bid to offer a moral imperative for why we ought to ensure that this will happen. And studies show that this acts as a compensation for religious beliefs in its adherents. Finally, and conveniently, there is within the movement replacements for the three theological virtues, namely faith, hope, and love. Using this rubric, I'll now explore whether transhumanism will truly offers to provide a superior alternative to the Christian narrative. So let's start with faith and progress. The myth of progress confronts confronts and challenges at both an the myth of progress is challengeable at both an empirical and metaphysical level. At an empirical level, Philippe de Verdot notes that civilization, not hunter-gatherer society, is better described as solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Hunter-gatherer society more often produces individuals of noteworthy health and laid-back lifestyle. Civilization, not its absence, has effected a more brutish and nasty period of human history: 2 world wars, a Cold War, and countless genocides. Kurzweil, he remarks, tends to overlook or downplay the actual or potential dangers of technology. As technology increases, so does our existential insecurity. For the first time, we can enact our own extinction in not one, but multiple different ways. And those ways are likely to only grow in coming years. Metaphysically, Harari has not been shy in his allegiance to Vipassana Buddhism, stating he believes this satisfaction is the primary drive of the universe. Where this primordial desire arises from, he doesn't state. As such, Harari has to smuggle in Buddhist beliefs to ultimately ground his transhumanist faith. Kurzweil, by contrast, appeals to Lee Smolin's evolutionary cosmogony to justify a belief in progress. While time restricts evaluating this fully, I'll briefly note that Smolin's hypothesis, even at the time of Kurzweil's writing, was considered a metaphysical impossibility. Thus, on both an empirical and metaphysical grounds, there seems to be little reason to embrace the myth of progress as a superior alternative to the Christian narrative. So what about hope and immortality? While both offers promise a future free of death, what hope can that generate for us now in the early 21st century? Our best hope will be to ensure we hang around until the advent of Kurzweil's singularity, or Harari's Internet of all things. Even Kurzweil recognizes the near hopelessness for many of our individual circumstances, having been born in an age just before the possibility of technological immortality. Nevertheless, he believes that in his 97th year of life, in the year 2045, immortality will be possible. As such, he maintains a strict diet and supplements it with 250 pills per day and 6 intravenous therapies every week. Unfortunately, most reviewers of Kurzweil's work conclude that his projections are hopelessly optimistic. To quote Michael Burdett, this apocalypticism incites a central mood most transhumanists convey: anxiety. The stakes are high because the nature and outcome of a continued human race beyond the singularity depends upon our present actions, end quote. Thus, what transhumanists offer is not hope, but sheer existential anxiety. So finally, let's ask about the ethic of love. Transhumanists often maintain that since our goal is deification, this demands of us all a cooperative action needed to ensure its imminent arrival. Hence, Ray Kurzweil hypothesizes a new religion and tries to which couples respect for consciousness with an impulse toward greater knowledge. That's his new religion. Likewise, Harari's predicted religion, which he deems dataism, grounds ethical norms on freedom of information flow. Now, you notice something's missing there from Kurzweil's. For Harari, this ethic prioritizes the expansion of information over the sacredness of the human individual. He questions why governments will, in the future, value human rights over economic dividends. Such a future pushes against our fundamental moral impulses. Thus, it should be resisted rather than encouraged. And while Kurzweil includes respect for autonomy of conscious agents in his new religion, he provides no grounds for sustaining this Christian or humanist value, especially in cases when this value might conflict with technological or informational advancement. Moreover, given the minimal hope of participating in the future singularity, which I just mentioned, transhumanists face a perhaps unanswerable question. Why should my life be governed by a possibility I'll likely never see? From the transhumanist perspective, it is difficult to see what answer could be given. Given the preceding argument, it has become challenging to approve of the optimisms authors like Kurzweil, Harari, and Moravec place in transhumanist ideals. Sir Martin Rees, an astrophysicist from Cambridge, provides a far grimmer perspective on human prospects for the decades ahead. He writes, I think the odds are no better than 50-50 that our present civilization on Earth will survive to the end of the present century. Our choices and actions could ensure the perpetual future of life, not just on Earth, but perhaps far beyond it too. Or in contrast, through malign intent or through misadventure, 21st century technologies could jeopardize life's potential, foreclosing its human and post-human future. What happens on Earth in this century could conceivably make a difference between near eternity, filled with ever more complex and subtle forms of life, and one filled with nothing but base matter. Given the atheistic transhumanist narrative, provides no assurance the singularity or Internet of all things will ever be realized. The ever-expanding scope of technological power, coupled with the grotesque levels of environmental degradation, this should provoke in us far more angst than optimism. This being the case, should this not elicit a primitivist impulse? Perhaps one could argue the Luddites were correct after all. It would be difficult in any case to argue that humanity should gamble with planetary extinction for the sake of its own divinization. But of course, a transhumanism that may imply its own negation undermines itself. Hence, atheistic transhumanism may not only fail to ground the human desire for transcendence, it may not even be a consistent form of transhumanism at all. Ironically, if transhumanism desires to rationalize all its premises, its faith, its hope, and its love, it must be coupled with another narrative, namely Christianity, that can offer it ontological grounds for optimism, hope, and love towards neighbor and world. A transhumanism of the optimistic variety so common today can only survive in conjunction with the narrative of this type. Thus, transhumanism has not supplanted the Christian faith, but may, strangely enough, complement it in many respects. To paraphrase Thomas Aquinas, one of the great saints in history, Christianity does not destroy transhumanism, but may perhaps perfect it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. And I now open up for questions.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. I just wanted to follow up on the comment that transhumanism needs to be paired with Christianity. There are many people, I think, who would suggest that Christianity is antithetical to transhumanism in the sense that transhumanism puts a hope in human progress, a hope in technology, whereas Christianity is anchored more in a trust and hope in Jesus. And the incarnation of Jesus, as an example of what it means to be a human being fully alive, was not one that included a lot of technological enhancements and whatnot. So I wonder if you could just comment on whether there's compatibility there, and then also maybe say something about the Christian transhumanist movement, which has been attracting some Christians, and I've heard people from Mormonism have been in particular attracted to that particular view.
Yeah.
Just wonder if you'd comment on some of those things.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll take. First one is the compatibility. Second one is the Christian transhumanist. And then I'll take those two real quick. So the first one, I don't think necessarily, there are versions of Christianity I don't think are compatible. But what's interesting about the transhumanist movement is there's been quite a few essays now written, and it's becoming very obvious that transhumanism grew out of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin's work. In fact, he is, as far as I know, he's the first person to ever use the word transhuman. And of course, he was a Jesuit priest. It was a very overtly Christian narrative that he was doing. So it depends on which version of Christianity. I think more so the point of mine was not necessarily that Christianity should adopt transhumanism. Just to clarify, I'm not saying you're saying this, but just to clarify, it's not that Christianity should adopt transhumanism, but transhumanism needs something else. So for instance, Harari needed Buddhism to justify this idea that there's some sort of desire, push, teleology toward higher progress. And Christianity, especially like Christian millennialism, post-millennialism, that's the sort of narrative that can offer it. So that's more so my point. Number two, I've actually spoken at the last meeting of the Christian Transhumanist Society, so I know them pretty well. I think there's a lot, I have a lot of opinions on it as it still stands. I think Christians need to be involved in transhumanism, not necessarily supportive, but be involved in those sorts of conversations. And I think Teilhard de Chardin actually gives us, along with a few other thinkers like Pannenberg, gives us a sort of avenue into those sorts of conversations that transhumanism right now is missing. So I'm actually real happy to see that those conversations are starting, at least. So that's an initial comment. Another thing I'd say is I said that most are atheists. 6% of registered transhumanists are Christian, which is kind of unfortunate.
Thank you. I agree. We need to join the dialogue. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Seth, for your presentation. I'm just curious. You brought up the point of anxiety. And how would historical events such as pandemics, which we are in one right now, affect the issue of anxiety, and especially in relation to transhumanism and development of it?
Yeah. So I think it could, in one sense, it with the technological thing, the side of it with anxiety, with people like Ray Kurzweil, they always like to emphasize the goods and sort of push down the sort of bads. It's not universal. I think Harari is a little bit more leveled, and definitely some of the other thinkers are a little bit more leveled in that. But, as vaccines come into effect, so is the possibility that a mutant virus could come about through scientific progress or something like that. So in a sense, viruses that never existed before, that increases anxiety that could be unleashed upon the world accidentally or purposefully, say through acts of war. So in a sense, it's always, this technological progress is always a double-edged sword. Wherever one side advances, the danger also advances. So the closer we get to deification, the closer we also come to destruction, which is why I really like that Martin Rees quote. It's 50-50, because it sort of looks at both sides of the weapon, the sword of technology well. And that's kind of my initial thoughts.
So I was just curious, since you mentioned about Christians and transhumanism, I've had folks tell me from those circles that this is the reason why Jesus Christ put upon flesh, he became human, so we can all become transhumans.
Yeah, so that's actually a paraphrase of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin when he first originally used that. It depends on what we mean by human there, but I like the sympathy. That gets into theological anthropology, which I might step out of since it's such a complex topic.
Yeah, what I told my friend was that he did not come down to this earth and took upon the human form to make us transhumans, but his goal was to restore us to the perfect humanism or humans that we were initially created as. So I don't know whether that has any.
Yeah, one quick, I know my time's up. John Behr out of Aberdeen talks a lot about basically what the sympathy you've just outlined. John Behr, Behr.